She thought it was a joke, a test no one could pass. But this humble mechanic didn't just fix the engine, he changed her entire world. This is the story of how a challenge became a promise, and a promise became something more. The sun was unforgiving that afternoon, baking the chrome and glass of the city's most elite auto expo. A red velvet rope sectioned off a glimmering titanium gray luxury sports car, custom-built, hand-tuned, and the pride of the CEO who now stood beside it, arms crossed, eyes narrow. The cameras were already flashing, journalists murmuring about the powertrain specs and eco-engine revolution the car was supposed to debut. But right now it wasn't moving. It wasn't even humming. The engine was dead. She looked flawless in her designer heels and tailored white blazer. But her jaw was tight, her patience thinner than the polish on her manicured nails. The vehicle had worked perfectly during yesterday's test run. Yet now, minutes before her media presentation, it had decided to die in front of the entire industry. Her assistants whispered, sweating, fumbling with calls. Technicians ran diagnostics, checking ports and panels with no results. Nothing. A crowd gathered. Some just wanted to see the car. Others were waiting for the spectacle of a breakdown. Not of the engine, but of the woman behind the brand. She rolled her eyes and took a deep breath, projecting composure. But inside, she boiled. She glanced at her smartwatch. 19 minutes past schedule. Her PR team was waving from the corner, desperate to move on. She turned to the crowd, lifting her voice just enough to carry over the murmurs. "If anyone here can fix this in 30 minutes, she said with a chuckle, loud and sarcastic, "I'll marry them myself." Laughter erupted. Phones came out. Da-da. A few engineers laughed nervously. Some looked tempted, but no one moved forward. They all knew that engine, it was one of a kind. State-of-the-art, unforgiving, and the company's own engineers couldn't even figure out what was wrong. Then came the sound of boots. Not designer shoes, not polished Oxfords. Work boots. Dusty and oil-stained. A tall, quiet man stepped through the onlookers. Black, mid-30s maybe, wearing a faded navy jumpsuit with his sleeves rolled up. His face was calm, unreadable. No press badge, no clipboard, just a toolbox in his hand. The security guard moved to block him, but the CEO raised a brow and waved. Her hand, "Let him," she said, amused. He approached the car with no swagger, no smile. He didn't acknowledge the murmurs or the mockery. He just knelt beside the front wheel, pressed a hand against the hood, then popped it open. The engine compartment was a maze of hybrid tech, AI-regulated sensors, and coils that hadn't even hit the market yet. Still, he didn't hesitate. He scanned the layout like a surgeon studying a familiar anatomy. The crowd quieted. Watching this, nobody with growing curiosity. Someone whispered, "Who is he?" Another laughed, "Probably a valet." But he was already removing a panel. No hesitation. No second guessing. No talking. The CEO leaned slightly forward, her arms still crossed. A half-smile tugged at her lips. She wasn't worried. Not really. The man had less than 30 minutes and nothing but a pocket-sized toolkit. It was entertainment at best. At worst, a bit of PR distraction before she called off the event. He worked in silence, cleaning terminals with his fingers, blowing dust from sensor arrays, tightening a thread-sized connector near the main distributor coil. Then he unplugged. A small control chip held it to the light and shook his head. A flicker of amusement passed his face. The CEO's smile twitched. He noticed, "Problem?" she asked, voice laced with sarcasm. He didn't look up. "You've got a ghost loop in your self-diagnostic system," he said evenly. "Engine thinks it's in lockdown mode." "It's not." Then he carefully reached into his toolbox, pulled out a small override plug, and slipped it into a secondary port beneath the dashboard. Somewhere in the car's guts, a low hum flickered on. Crowd leaned in. 14 minutes left. Someone said, still kneeling, the man adjusted a dial, swapped out a tiny capacitor, and tapped a fuse with his knuckle. Then he stood, brushed his hands on his jumpsuit, and looked at the CEO. "Try it now," he said quietly. She raised a brow. You sure? He nodded once. She slipped into the driver's seat, still skeptical. Her manicured fingers pressed the start button. A second of silence. Then the engine growled to life, not a weak sputter, not a desperate rumble, but a perfect, clean, deep-throated roar. The lights on the dash blinked in perfect rhythm. Systems green, power full, idle steady. The entire crowd gasped. She looked up at him from the driver's seat, stunned. He stood there, expression calm, not gloating, just waiting. She stepped out slowly, closing the door behind her. Her team stood frozen. Cameras were already back up, people cheering, clapping, even whistling. She cleared her throat, trying to recover her composure. "Well," she said with a short laugh. That was unexpected. He didn't say a word. Just how did you even know what to look for?" she asked. "I built systems like this," he replied simply. "Just not for show." And with that, he turned to leave. She blinked. "Wait," she called after him. "What's your name?" He didn't stop walking, didn't answer. The crowd parted around him as he disappeared beyond the ropes, swallowed up by the expo. Behind her, the engine continued to purr, smooth, unshakable, and for the first time in her career, the CEO had no words. Only the sound of quiet awe and a single viral clip already hitting 1 million views. The engine's roar faded into applause. Not polite, clapping real cheers, like a stadium crowd erupting after a last-second goal. Phones were up, recording. The press shoved forward, capturing the stunned expression on the CEO's face as the humble mechanic wiped his hands on his jumpsuit and calmly turned away. Her team stood frozen, glancing at one another with pale faces, unsure how to proceed. They had witnessed something that didn't just break the tension, it shattered the hierarchy. This man, who hadn't even been invited, just made her billion-dollar tech team look obsolete. She tried to salvage it. With cameras flashing around her and eyes watching for a response, she offered a half-smile. She said, loud enough to be picked up by microphones, "I guess I owe you a dinner." All I meant? It was a weak joke, an escape hatch, a way to laugh off what was meant to be a joke of her own. But now it sounded hollow. She knew it. He knew it. Everyone knew it. But before anyone could digest the moment, a clip surfaced online. Had caught the exact moment she'd thrown down the challenge, clear as crystal. Asterisk, "If anyone can fix this in 30 minutes, I'll marry them myself." The moment he stepped forward, the laughter, the repair, the stunned silence. And her words again echoing beneath the trending tag. #marry the mechanic. By the time night fell, the internet was ablaze. Tens of millions of views in hours. Edits, remixes, memes. The mechanic's face stoic.com sharp was plastered. Across timelines framed with captions like "The man who fixed more than just a car" and *CEO just met her match. Meanwhile, the CEO wasn't trending for her innovation, her leadership, or her car. She was trending for underestimating. Someone who didn't fit her polished world. Her laugh, once charming in boardrooms, now sounded cruel in the court of public opinion. The mechanic, however, didn't change. While invitations for interviews, brand deals, and influencer offers poured in, he showed up at his modest garage. The next morning at 7 a.m., just like always, no camera crews. Suits, just grease, metal, and the quiet buzz of real work. He fixed an old Chevy's radiator, taught a teenager how to change brake pads, and drank coffee from a chipped mug. When asked about the video, he simply replied, "People are bored. It'll pass." But it didn't pass. Her world shifted. Stockholders called. Journalists mocked her. Rival CEOs smirked in interviews. Her own team walked on eggshells. The board didn't say it out loud. She felt it in their eyes. You lost control. She hadn't just made mistakes. She had revealed a blind spot. The kind of blind spot that breaks leaders. She couldn't stop thinking about him, about his calm, his silence. Well, he walked away as if none of it mattered. Like he didn't need a spotlight to validate his skill by the third day. She snapped, "Clear my schedule," she told her assistant. "I'm going out, but ma'am, the PR, I said clear it." She arrived at his garage unannounced, but not unnoticed. Her sleek SUV pulled up, flanked by a blacked-out security car. Before she even stepped out, people were already filming. A few reporters who had been stalking his shop followed quickly behind. He looked up from beneath a lifted hood, wiping sweat from his forehead. He didn't look surprised, just tired. She approached, ignoring the crowd behind her, heels crunching gravel. "Can we talk?" she asked. He nodded toward the side entrance, and without another word, disappeared through it. She followed inside. It was quiet. Tools hung neatly on pegboards. A bench was cluttered with circuit boards and socket wrenches. Portable radio hummed with static. She turned to him, arms folded now, not out of arrogance but defensiveness. "Why didn't you take any of the offers?" He sat on a stool and looked at her like she had asked why the sky was blue. "Fixing your car was the easy part. I'm not in it for clout." She blinked. That word again, clout. To her world, image was currency. Branding was survival. But here was a man sitting in a sun-warmed garage turning down millions because it didn't mean anything to him. She had flown across continents to pitch her tech to governments. He wouldn't even say yes to a morning talk show. "You know, I didn't mean it," she said quietly. "The whole marriage thing." He gave a slow nod. "I know, but you walked up anyway. You needed help," he said. Simple as that. Didn't see anyone else moving. She looked around the garage, then back at him. "You're different than I thought." "You only looked once," he replied. That stung more than she expected. For a moment, she just stood there, the weight of the world on her sharp shoulders. Feeling small in a place where power came from doing, not demanding. Then, without knowing why, she reached into her jacket pocket and held out a white envelope. "What's that?" he asked, not touching it. "It's an invitation," she said, "to the Innovation Gala. Big industry event, black tie. It's kind of my apology." "To me or to the press?" She looked at him carefully.
"Oh."
"You. Just you." He took it, didn't open it, didn't say thank you, just studied her face for a moment longer. She didn't flinch this time. Outside, the media had given up waiting. Her car waited silently by the curb. She turned toward the exit but stopped at the door. "I know it won't impress you," she said over her shoulder, "but if you show up, there'll be a seat next to me." He didn't reply. Later that evening, the envelope sat unopened on his workbench. He poured himself a glass of water, flipped off the lights, and stood in silence as the radio played a soft blues track from the corner. He didn't care about awards or billionaires or hashtags, but there was something in her voice that felt ... different. Not desperation, not guilt, but maybe, just maybe respect. And sometimes, that's worth more than the engine he'd fixed. The ballroom shimmered with gold and glass, chandeliers casting soft halos on tuxedos and gowns that cost more than some cars outside. The industry elite were here tonight. Investors, founders, legacy engineers, and high-profile influencers buzzing around like polished bees in a hive of status. Waiters in white gloves floated between conversations, topping off champagne flutes, and offering bites of delicacies no one could pronounce. Then the doors opened, and heads turned, not because of who walked in, but because of who he wasn't. He wore no body. Just a neatly pressed black shirt under a charcoal gray suit that didn't bear a brand name. No flashy cufflinks. No personal stylist. But his posture was upright, presence quiet and grounded. He didn't look like a guest. He looked like someone who could tear down the stage lights and rebuild them better. The whispers started almost immediately. "That's him, right? The mechanic guy? What's he doing here?" Some grinned, others sneered. A few ambitious execs made beelines toward him, business cards at the ready. He nodded politely but declined every offer. He wasn't looking to license his name. No, he wasn't starting a brand. No, he didn't need an agent. He didn't know what to make of that. Declining fame. Declining fortune. Who does that? She saw him from across the room, her breath catching for a moment, not because of what he wore, but because he hadn't changed. Not his demeanor, not his attitude, not even his eyes. Still unbothered. still watching the room like an observer, not a participant. She approached him herself this time. No fanfare, no cameras, just a quiet, "Glad you came." Hearn gave a simple nod. Didn't want the envelope to go to waste. They stood by the bar, two worlds that rarely touched. He sipped water. She had a glass of aged scotch but didn't seem to taste it. Around them, laughter and music rolled like waves, but their little corner stayed still. She made small talk, unsure of how to start. "No, people are still talking about what you did." "People talk about a lot of things," he replied. "You don't seem impressed." "Because I'm not trying to impress anyone. But shut her up, in the best way." She looked at him differently, now less like an anomaly, more like a puzzle. "You could have cashed in, you know. Millions, and done what?" "Slapped my name on a toolkit I didn't design." She tilted her head. "Is it that you hate business?" "No," he said calmly. "I hate pretending value comes from noise instead of skill." Her smile faltered, and she glanced around the room, the gilded crowd. The hollow handshakes, the speeches, people rehearsed to themselves in mirrors. "You think I'm one of them?" "I think you've built something impressive," he said. "But I also think you've forgotten why you started." That stung more than she expected. She turned to him fully, defenses dropping like weights. "And what do you think I started for? You wanted to fix something. The world, maybe, the system, a gap no one else saw. But now you run a machine that cares more about momentum than direction." She stared at him. No one spoke to her like this, not her board, not her advisors, not even her father when he handed her the company. She was used to deference, to admiration laced with fear. But this wasn't that. This was ... clarity. And strangely, it felt good. They drifted into deeper talk about design flaws in electric grids, about the ethics of automation, about community. Outreach, and how kids in rough neighborhoods still use scrap metal to learn wiring because no one would give them real tools. She listened more than she spoke, and when she did speak, it was stripped of polish, honest, curious. "You're not just a mechanic," she finally said, almost to herself. "I never said I was just anything," he replied. Later that night, she stood alone on the terrace, watching the city lights flicker. Her assistant found her there, coat draped over her arm. "You okay?" she asked. The CEO nodded slowly, her expression softer than usual. "Do you know what he said to me?" She murmured. "He said I've forgotten why I started." The assistant raised an eyebrow. "That's bold." "No," she said, almost smiling. "That's real. No one's been that honest with me in years." The gala ended with trophies handed out, toasts made, deals promised over laughter, but she didn't care. The man who fixed her car had just rewired something deeper in her, and she couldn't stop thinking about it. The next morning, he was back in his garage, sleeves rolled up, showing a group of neighborhood kids how to assemble an engine block from discarded parts. They listened like it was gospel. He didn't mention the gala, didn't show photos, didn't bring up the CEO to him. Last night was just that last night, but before the day ended, his phone buzzed with a notification. A breaking news alert. 1. Of the CEO's flagship prototypes, the next-gen self-driving transport model had failed a critical safety test. Publicly, headlines swarmed, asterisk unfixable flaw. Tech giant scrambles to salvage reputation. Asterisk. And somewhere between her office and that moment of panic, she thought of only one person who might be able to fix it, not because of fame, not because of credentials, but because he was the only one who didn't want anything from her at all. The news didn't just make headlines, ignited chaos. The prototype's failure was public, undeniable, and brutal. Investors began backing out. Stakeholders demanded answers. Her engineers offered excuses and revised timelines, but she could see the panic in their eyes. No one had a solution, and the clock was ticking. The technology they had promised as revolutionary was now being mocked as reckless. Her name, once tied to vision and innovation, was now trending alongside words like crumbling and overhyped. Behind the walls of her pristine office, silence became heavier than noise. She stared out over the city. wondering how everything she built so carefully had started to come apart till a single image filled her mind. A calm pair of eyes, grease-stained hands, and the man who had walked away from her gala without needing applause. No security followed her this time. No convoy of SUVs. She drove herself, pulling up once again to that small corner garage where laughter echoed from inside and the air smelled of oil and hope. She stepped out, heels crunching gravel, and walked in like someone who no longer cared about power-only solutions. He looked up from under the hood of an old van, expression unreadable, but not unkind. Wiping his hands, he gave a small nod. Waiting, she didn't pretend this was casual. She didn't dress it up. She just breathed in and said, "I need your help." He said nothing at first, motioning for her to follow him to the back of the shop, away from the kids and the tools. She stood near his workbench as the quiet wrapped around them. She began to explain what failed, why it mattered, how no one else could figure out why the AI-driven steering loop caused intermittent collapses. She showed him schematics, raw data, internal reports. And then she stopped talking. She looked at him, really looked. "No, I have no right to ask you this, but I'm not asking you for the company. I'm asking for me." He folded his arms, studying the paper. "You're finally asking like a human," he said softly. She didn't flinch, "because I finally feel like one." He took the file, nodded once, and simply said, "Let's fix it." They worked out of his garage. No corporate lab, no multi-million-dollar software systems. Just stripped-down engines, worn-in laptops, and the kind of honesty that doesn't exist in glass towers. She watched him think how he moved through the problem like water finding its level. Ego, no rush. Every click, every weld, every recalculation had intention behind it. He didn't act like he was proving anything. He acted like the solution already existed. They just had to find it. For hours. They didn't talk about the press or the expectations. They talked about torque ratios, redundancy logic, ethics and machine learning. She was good, sharp even, but he was deeper. He didn't just understand the code. He understood the consequences. Somewhere around midnight, while recalibrating the fail-safe, he asked her, "Why didn't you build this one yourself?" She hesitated. "I've been leading so long, I forgot how to build." He looked up, then started remembering. She smiled, not the corporate smile, not the smirk she gave reporters, but something smaller, warmer. She remembered the feeling of invention, not leadership, not power, just the pure joy of solving something real. When the system rebooted and the test simulation ran without error, they didn't cheer. They just looked at each other. He nodded once, quiet and calm. She laughed gently, not from surprise, but from a strange, overwhelming relief. The problem was fixed, but something more was too. At the next press event, cameras flashed again, but this time she didn't stand alone. He walked beside her, not behind her, not in the crowd, but on the stage. She introduced him by name, credited him not just as the engineer who salvaged their future, but the person who reminded her why she started building things in the first place. She paused, glanced his way, then turned to the crowd. "Sometimes the smartest person in the room isn't in the room until you invite them in," she said. "And sometimes you don't need a title to lead. You just need to show up." With hands that work and a heart that listens, the audience erupted in applause. But what made people lean forward was what came next. She turned toward him with a look so sincere it softened the air. "Still holding me to that marriage deal?" she asked. The same line from weeks ago, but this time, with no sarcasm, no smirk, just hope. He didn't rush the moment, simply smiled and said, "Only if you're serious this time." The cameras caught their laughter, but missed the quiet agreement in their eyes, something not for headlines or hashtags, but just for them. Weeks passed, then came a small, simple wedding, not in a cathedral or rooftop terrace, but in the backyard behind his garage. The kids from the neighborhood were there, dressed in shirts tucked into jeans. His coworkers cleaned up and brought homemade food. Her assistant cried quietly in the back row. There was no orchestra, no choreographed entrance, just soft music. From a speaker and people who knew what real love looked like. She wore a dress without diamonds. He wore the same suit he wore to the gala. They held hands beneath a string of warm lights and said vows that weren't rehearsed for effect, but meant with every breath. Her voice trembled, not from nerves, but from truth. I laughed when you said you could fix the impossible. But it turns out you didn't just fix an engine. You fixed me too. He didn't say anything grand, just squeezed her hand and nodded like always. No need for noise. That night, they didn't ride off in a limo. They danced under string lights, surrounded by grease-stained chairs and folding tables, and when the stars came out, they sat quietly on the curb outside the garage, shoes off, listening to the world slow down in the end. It wasn't about a car. It was about someone who saw value where others didn't, who stayed grounded when the world floated away, who fixed things not because they were broken, but because they mattered. And sometimes, that's how hearts get rebuilt too.